As outlined in the previous 3 videos, human culture can be seen to be the manifestation of the 7 key neurochemical processes of the human brain. Manifestations that form the items of mediation, which collectively constitute the culture of a population, such as all of our technology, art, and language. And this occurs as individuals with a preference for stimulating a particular part of the brain group together. However, these 7 key neurochemical processes of the brain don't necessarily exist in a harmonious way, both within the mind of an individual or across a population of reproducing individuals. And it's the tension between these cognitive processes that creates the underlying dynamics of politics and cultural change. Let's look at a couple of examples of this. Starting with the tension between other awareness and self-awareness. This fundamental tension is not only pervasive throughout modern history at the political and cultural level, but it is also fundamental to what it means to be human. All of us have an evolved neurochemical process of self-awareness, which is essential to our individuality, survival and health, as previously discussed. And we all have evolved cognitive processes associated with the awareness of the health and condition of other humans. However, these 2 sets of neurochemical processes are in constant tension as we try to stimulate both in a regular and ongoing way. Engaging in any activity that gives us personal pleasure is usually at odds with an activity that stimulates our other awareness. As self-awareness is strongly associated with personal freedom, the very concept of freedom is itself a manifestation of self-awareness. And helping and caring for others, more often than not, places restrictions on our personal freedom, and can sometimes even put our own health or life in jeopardy. So all humans are engaged in this constant balancing act of trying to stimulate both self-awareness and other awareness in order to survive and enjoy life, while also facilitating procreation. And in the case of populations, the same tension can be seen to occur as the distribution of these neurochemical processes forms varying clusters of individuals across a population, resulting in some groups with a very strong preference for stimulating other awareness, other groups with a strong preference for stimulating self-awareness, and still other groups with a moderate preference for either one. And it's the distribution of these cognitive processes across a population that translates into the politics of all large-scale human populations. A strong preference for other awareness, for example, results in a desire for a large and active government. Government, in a general sense, is simply an institutional manifestation of other awareness. As populations increased in size throughout history, other awareness individuals manifested this neurochemical process as items of mediation that collectively constituted a government, with its composite of public policies, programs, and physical structures designed to provide a safety net, support, and welfare for all members of the public. And the very political theories and parties of the left wing of politics are themselves the manifestation of other awareness, such as socialism and Marxism, which advocate a government-owned infrastructure and a government-run economy. At the other extreme, those individuals with a strong preference for self-awareness are opposed to large government. This group have a strong preference for personal freedom and personal responsibility. So the political theories and parties they manifest as, such as liberal democracy and conservatism, advocate small government, a privately owned infrastructure, and a free market economy. In the middle of these 2 extreme groups are a large number of people who have varying degrees of other awareness and self-awareness. These individuals can collectively be referred to as moderates, and their cognitive processes manifest as political theories and parties that advocate a balance or compromise between the human need to stimulate these 2 fundamental neurochemical processes, such as the political position of democratic socialism where you have varying degrees of both publicly and privately owned institutions and infrastructure, and a government-regulated, market economy. So it can be seen that there is a biological basis to all of politics. The political spectrum, from left-wing to right-wing, is merely a manifestation of the neurochemical preferences of a population in regard to other awareness and self-awareness. And the type of political system a population has merely reflects its distribution of these neurochemical processes across the population. More individuals with a preference for other awareness results in a left-leaning political and economic system. And more individuals with a preference for self-awareness results in a right-leaning system. And a larger number of individuals with a preference for stimulating both of these neurochemical processes results in a compromised position. At a fundamental level then, politics really is this simple. It all comes down to the sensations people have in their brain. When individuals hear about a new government policy, such as, for example, government housing for the homeless, they immediately imagine the people who were going to benefit from that policy. And if that image makes them feel good, then they're in favor of the policy. And if it doesn't, they're against it. And this support, or opposition, results in the creation of items of mediation that reflect either the other awareness or self-awareness processes of the brain. When individuals vote for their political representatives, those representatives become agents for the individual's worldview. And collectively, these representatives form the democratic system of the population. And consequently, the democratic system is the manifestation of the neurochemical distribution of that population. Whether that be other awareness, self-awareness, or some combination of these. And long-term political and cultural change can only occur when there's a change in the distribution of neurochemical preferences across a population, which then manifests as a new political system for the population. However, the three types of political systems described here are all the manifestations of populations who allow for individual voting. But historically, most human populations haven't actually allowed for individual voting, or only to a limited degree. So let's briefly look at the three main types of large-scale political systems that have actually dominated most of human history. The first, and most prevalent, is that of the so-called God King. In this political system, there has been a merger between the manifestation of dominance and the manifestation of metaphysics. This would have occurred when a warlord initially gained control of a population which already had a priestly caste who controlled its belief system. An agreement would be reached between the two, and the warlord would be anointed the God King of the population, with some divine connection to a higher metaphysical world. The heirs of the warlord would then carry the political system on to future generations. Examples of this are the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, the Maya civilization, in a modified form, the Roman Empire, and certainly the Holy Roman Empire, and all the European monarchs of the past. In fact, almost all of the large-scale populations of the past, in all regions of the world, had this type of political system, in one form or another. And that's because it's a very effective system to organize, mobilize, and control large populations. And individuals are much more likely to fight and die for their group or country if they are ordered to do so by a king who has a divine link to a metaphysical realm. A metaphysical realm within which they are promised a special place. The second type of non-voting political system is that of pure dominance regimes. These political systems are mainly a manifestation of dominance by a small portion of the population, usually a military regime, which imposes its will onto the rest of the population, and the military leader becomes a dictator. These systems are usually short-lived. Because a large section of the population resents the control by dominance these regimes represent. However, some of these political systems become the third type, which is that of communist regimes. These are a manifestation of dominance and other awareness. If a military regime of the previous type is also strongly concerned with the manifestation of other awareness, we see the regime emerging as a communist party and government. These can often be long-lived, as they have support from a large section of the population, who also have a preference for stimulating the other awareness processes of their brain. And so we have, in total, 6 main types of political systems. 3 voting and 3 non-voting that human populations manifest in the present and historically, all of which are the consequence of the emergence of different neurochemical processes of the brain, or some combination of them. It's perhaps worth pausing here for a moment to make the following comment. Evolution isn't concerned, of course, with what's right or what's wrong. The type and distribution of neurochemical processes across any population of humans has simply evolved to maximize the chances of human survival. And these indifferent brain processes merely manifest as the culture and politics of modern human populations, with no regard as to what is a good or a bad manifestation, except in regard to the survival of humans in particular environments. So the intention here is simply to be as objective as possible in this biologically based analysis of politics and the types of political systems that are manifested from the neurochemical distribution of particular human populations. Turning now to the question of cultural change. What we'll look at is how some of these conflicting neurochemical processes have resulted in changes in the character of the culture of populations over a long period of time. So let's step back now and away from actual political systems and examine the major change in human culture that has occurred over the last 1,000 years or so. The move from traditional culture to modern culture. That is to say, the move from human populations with a major manifestation of metaphysics and other awareness to populations with a major manifestation of rationality and self-awareness. All large-scale traditional cultures of the past were dominated by an organized religion of some form. Organized religion is a manifestation of the metaphysics neurochemical processes of the brain, and importantly, also the other awareness processes. It was actually the merger of these two manifestations that made these cultures so successful, and eventually led to this being the dominant form for all future populations. By combining the two, large populations could be organized and controlled. Food and resources could be easily distributed throughout populations, and with an emphasis on the nurturing and welfare of all members of the population. They grew increasingly in size as large families became the norm. As for the culture of the populations of the modern era, what we see is the major manifestation of the rationality and self-awareness neurochemical processes. These two sets of cognitive processes dominate all aspects of contemporary populations. The manifestation of rationality as rational practices, procedures, and ideas forms the basis and structure of our economy, politics, and society. And the stimulation of self-awareness is an accepted part of all modern populations. Individuals buy and use all numbers of goods and services designed to stimulate their self-awareness in an ongoing manner. How then did we go from populations of humans who predominantly stimulated and manifested the neurochemical processes of metaphysics and other awareness to populations that mainly manifest rationality and self-awareness? Well, the suggestion here will be that the key mechanism of cultural change, in this case, was the widespread teaching of mathematics, which is a manifestation of rationality, resulted in the greater stimulation of rational neurochemical processes across populations. And eventually, over the course of centuries, also allowed for the greater stimulation and manifestation of self-awareness, neurochemical processes. So in effect, the growth of rationality unleashed self-awareness as a cultural force. Let's examine this in some detail. The widespread teaching of math first began amongst the populations of Europe, about 600 years ago. For the first time in human history, large sections of populations were taught math, not just the elite groups within a population. This gradually allowed then, over the period of centuries, for rational neurochemical processes to increase their distribution across these populations, which in turn resulted in the manifestation of rationality as more rational items of mediation throughout all levels of human society, from technology, cultural practices and procedures, and ideas. This greater manifestation of rationality occurred over hundreds of years as larger and larger numbers of individuals within populations gained access to math teaching. And it's important to note that the widespread teaching of math occurred before the scientific revolution. And the scientific revolution occurred before the Enlightenment. And all the key figures in the history of the development of modernity had instruction in mathematics. From Copernicus to Galileo to Kepler to Newton and Descartes, and so on, all studied math, and in many cases were major mathematicians in their own right, such as Descartes, who's also seen as the father of modern philosophy, the so-called philosophy of reason, and Isaac Newton, whose mathematical description of the universe gave mathematics and science a new authority throughout Europe and the world. This increase in rational thinking then resulted in an increase in scientific discoveries, which allowed for better and more powerful technology, which in turn led to more scientific theories and discoveries, and so on. All of this gradually increased the value of rationality in populations, and eventually gave birth to the Age of Reason, which constituted the manifestation of rationality as new rational ideas. Ideas that had a great authority within the culture of these populations. And eventually, this greater manifestation of rational neurochemical processes, in the form of advanced technology and new processes of production and distribution, resulted in the consumer culture of the 20th century. As the cost of manufacturing and distributing goods and services dropped dramatically. And a consumer culture is one where the neurochemical processes of self-awareness are constantly stimulated in most individuals from a very early age. This results in adult populations with a high percentage of individuals with a preference for stimulating self-awareness. And so, we end up with the modern culture of today, which is simply a time when human populations have a strong preference for stimulating both rationality and self-awareness. And finally, it's worth making the following point. The legacy of traditional culture continues to exist in the modern human culture of today. And so we see ongoing tension between the manifestation of metaphysics and the manifestation of rationality, and also the manifestation of other awareness and self-awareness. And this second type of neurochemical tension takes the form of what's referred to as moral and ethical conflict. All questions of morality and ethics come down to this tension between what's good for the population and what's good for the individual. Traditionally, the manifestation of other awareness dominated populations, and the stimulation of self-awareness was frowned upon, or even banned. Activities such as gluttony, promiscuity, alcohol or drug use, not attending church or community events, and so on, were all seen as immoral, to some degree. And individuals engaging in these stimulations of self-awareness were either punished, ostracized, expelled, or even killed. In modern societies, self-awareness has gained a greater prevalence across populations, and there's a greater acceptance of the desire and practice of self-awareness stimulation. Nevertheless, the intrinsic biological basis of other awareness and self-awareness means that their neurochemical tension and their manifest conflict will inevitably continue. But we'll leave the discussion of this large topic here for the time being. Hopefully this video has provided a useful overview of how this new idea gives a biologically based perspective on politics and on cultural change.